In the previous videos, we learned about how to use instrument and audio plugins. Let's finish the plugin discussion with MIDI plugins. So if we go over into the MIDI effects category of the browser, you'll notice that we have about 10 or so different MIDI plugins. Now on this ARP example track here, I've set this up to remind us that MIDI plugins, virtual instrument plugins, and audio plugins have to be used in a specific order on MIDI tracks. So, for example, if I try to take this MIDI arpeggiator plugin and move it and change the order here, you'll notice that I get this ugly error message down there in the left-hand corner saying MIDI effects before instruments. And if I try to take the audio plugin over here on the left and do the opposite, pull it over here, I again get that error message, but this time it's saying audio effects after instruments. So again, just to repeat myself, it's MIDI plugins first. They process MIDI signals. Then instruments like analog will take the MIDI signal and convert it to an audio signal, which they will then pass downstream to audio effects. And they have to go in that order: MIDI, instrument, and audio. So I want to just show you a little bit about some of the MIDI plugins that I use. One of the most basic is the arpeggiator, which will take a chord or a MIDI signal that's got chords, and it will break that into an arpeggio or a rhythmic pattern. So for example, I've got something set up here, and if I hold down a chord, this is what it sounds like. So I was holding down a 5 or 6 note chord, and I have a style chosen. So it's alternating the notes in a particular way, and you can see that we have many different styles. And it's doing that at the rate that I've set out. And you can do that again by like an 8th note or a 16th note. And that is being synced to the tempo in Ableton Live. And then things like gate allow us to control how short the notes are or how legato we hear it. And then areas like over here under the transpose area allow me to create multiple octaves. So you can see that it's transposing whatever my chord is, it'll play it at the original pitch, and then it will transpose it up an octave and play it a second time before it restarts the pattern. So without the arpeggiator plugin on, this is what we would get. Just a basic chord, and with the arpeggiator plugin re-enabled, we get this chord in this broken rhythmic pattern. And that's playing it slower this time because I had this set at 1/24th or a 16th note triplet before. Now, if we go over to the next track, I've got a chord plugin on here. And what happens here is that if you hold a note down, as that MIDI signal comes through this plugin, you can stack up to an additional 6 notes. And so you can set the shift to transpose the notes either up or down. And I've got them all transposing or shifting the additional notes higher. And you'll notice that that's by half step. So the shift 1, for example, is up 7 half steps or a perfect fifth. And this is what we get here. So I'm just playing one note on my keyboard. And this is really useful with the exception of it's the only chord that I can play on this track now. So as long as I need to play a minor 11th chord, well then that's great. You'll also notice that I've saved this as a preset. So if we click on the save button here, just like all the other plugins, this will take us into the user library where we can save this as a new version or a new preset so that if I want to have a minor 11th in the future, all I've got to do is go find this preset. I'm going to hit escape to get out of there. Now on the next track, I want to show you an example of what might happen as we start to combine multiple devices. So here I've got a drum rack, and on each one of these pads where you see a chord, I've added the chord plugin plus a Rhodes piano sound. So for example, if I click this, you can see over here that I've got the chord plugin, and I've also got the electric piano instrument set. And what I've done is done a different one for each one of these pads on this drum rack. So that allows me to play those notes and get different chords. And you can see the list here. And this is kind of in order that they would go in this section of this song. I go from C sharp minor 6 to E7 to B over A to G sharp minor 11. And that's really helpful in a situation in live performance where you've got multiple controllers going, you're also concentrating on doing something with Ableton Live in your computer, and maybe you've got a foot pedal going on, and you just don't have enough hands and fingers to do everything. So now I can play these different chords with one finger each. And that's a really handy way to be able to accomplish this, and a very interesting use of a drum rack and a chord plug-in and a virtual instrument. So some of the other ones that you might want to take a look at that I think are useful in this MIDI effects area include the scale plugin, which you can use to force all of your notes to be in one scale, and the pitch plugin, which will allow you to very easily transpose a track or a clip on a track. And then finally, this last example I have that's set up is with the random plugin. So let me select this track. And you can see this is a really simple plugin, or it looks that way. As the MIDI signal passes through this, though, I'm able to add an element of chance in that the actual MIDI note that comes out the other side is not the MIDI note that came in. And I can limit that to choices that are either above or below or both the note that's coming in. So in this case, I've limited it to the next 6 half steps above the note that's coming in. And then I've said to just choose a random one of all those notes. Now over in this sampler virtual instrument, I've created an instrument that has 7 samples, and they're all on a chromatic scale starting on F sharp. Now if I close that and I show you the MIDI clip, I'll show you that all the notes are on F sharp. I've also used a little bit of element of chance down here to set up a possibility that some of these notes won't even happen at all. So between the chance that's here and then the random plug-in that's switching between the different samples, I'm hoping to create a much more realistic sounding performance like a drummer who's slightly hitting the hi-hat in different places as they play. Check it out. So you can hear how that sounds much more like a real drummer than it does like a MIDI performance. So the amount that I use MIDI plugins has surprised me, and I absolutely love to watch how other Ableton users use them in their work. Check out the next chapter where we'll talk about how to use groups of plugins in Ableton racks.